Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is going to be a keynote event with Hector Forwood, who's currently the co-founder and CEO of Comtura. We're really excited to have him here today. And the Edinburgh Entrepreneur Society, if you haven't been here before, is one of the largest societies at the University of Edinburgh with over 100 paid members across 50 different degree programs. And we run various events throughout the year, including keynote events like this one today, in-person workshops, pitching competitions, and even a venture capital program in semester 2. And we've also recently launched a podcast, which first episode went live on the weekend. So definitely check that out. So thank you very much, Hector, for joining us today. Firstly, could we just get a quick introduction of yourself and your career so far?
Yeah, sure. So nice to meet you all. I'm Hector. I am the CEO and founder of Comtura, which is a platform to automate data entry into CRMs. What that basically means is we fill in information after a sales call. Why am I working on this and my kind of career that's led me up to this point? So I originally started my career selling perfume in Selfridges and Harrods, so very humble beginnings. I'm one of the rare people that will say I always wanted to go into sales. I've just always quite enjoyed it, just chatting to people. Then from there, I worked at one company called Feast It, where I learned my initial kind of skill set as a salesperson, primarily speaking with events planners. And then I basically actually got poached by a startup in a co-working space, and then got really lucky and joined a company called Cognizant. Went from a team of 6 to 150 in about 3 years, 0 to nearly 50 million ARR in that time. Had the opportunity to open our US office, become head of sales there. Then I basically got bit by the entrepreneurial bug. Tried joining my friend to do a startup called Hoist, which unfortunately failed. And then from there, found 2 new co-founders, and that leads me to Comtura, where we are today.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Jumping into that first startup you founded, Hoist, can you just give us some insight on that and what happened there and why you think the startup failed and what you really learned from that failure that you're bringing to Comtura today?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's worth noting that like a couple of industry stats, right? So in the UK in about 2017, only 89% of startups founded in that year managed to survive. The next year, only 57% survived. And it basically gets progressively worse year by year. The famous unicorns, so like Airbnb, less than 3% of startups ever reach that level of success. And every action and step you take, particularly in the early days, is just about survival. That's because you have limited resources, right? You only have so much money in your bank account. You've only got so much time you're able to dedicate. And eventually people kind of get burnt out. With Hoist, I think that there are kind of 3 reasons that it failed, in my opinion. The first is I didn't spend enough time scoping out my co-founders. Even though they were my friends at the time, we still are friends, but your personal relationships are very different from your business relationships and your motivations at that point. And alignment and where someone is in their life can be very, very different. So for example, our CTO at the time had just got married, just bought a new house, he's paying a mortgage, he had a part-time job at another company. And I didn't know at the time, but his wife was pressuring him to have a baby, and she was like, you need to do something that makes money. So he had to leave after a while because he wanted to support a new family, something I easily could have avoided if I'd spent the time investigating. The same on the other side, where the COO at the time, his dad had started a startup at the same time and had basically pressured him into leaving. And so again, something that I could have spent more time scoping out and understanding what was going on in the surroundings. One of the other things that really held us back was we didn't do enough market research. One of the best piece of advice I could possibly give you is spend £15 on a book called The Mum Test by Robert Fitzpatrick. It's probably come up in some of your resources. If not, it basically teaches you how to validate and conduct user interviews without asking leading questions, which is a primary reason startups fail because you're directing people into having a problem and them not bringing it up themselves. So you don't know if it's real or not. And you can invest a ton of time and energy and money, like we did, into fixing this problem that was kind of there, kind of not. But it wasn't so burning that people would, such a burning problem that people would take action and actually convert from a user into a paying customer. Also, the volume. We did 10 to 20 user interviews, should have done 50 plus, definitely. The final thing was product market fit, which is the main one that everyone's looking to get. I mean, we're still working on this at the moment. Is while the idea was neat and useful, we were looking at our competitors and we solved 5% of a problem really, really well, but they already had the problem kind of solved by 95%. And so again, there wasn't enough of a need for them to convert. And again, that could have probably been scoped out by user interviews. And so those three things, so market research, not enough time spent with co-founders, and then product market fit, are the three reasons I think that it died.
Jumping into the sort of product market fit of that issue, what actually was the product? What were you offering?
Sure. So we were assigning keywords to files or links that people use regularly. So if you've ever used Grammarly, where if you write a typing error, it will highlight and offer a correction. So if you were to write something like, here is my calendar, it would highlight in the email and then automatically embed your Calendly link or whatever one you're using. Likewise, or like, here is our pricing deck, and it would pull it out of your Google Drive and automatically embed it into the email. So a productivity platform to save time.
Perfect. And jumping really back to where you really sort of started once you left university, how did you get the right kind of skills to jump into entrepreneurship? You mentioned you worked at Harrods. What age was that? Was that during university, before university, or?
So that was actually my first job after university, and I'd actually was studying biomed because I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and then they changed the junior doctor laws about how much you could earn, and then I actually left because I was like, I'm going to join the working world because I don't want to be a doctor anymore, and then moved to Harrods. And the thing about working in an environment like that actually was even something as kind of consumer facing as selling perfume and kind of interacting with the general public, you actually build a lot of confidence doing it, because you're literally standing there trying to spray perfume, and it smells awful after a while because everyone else is doing it around you. But you eventually have to, someone will come over and say like, oh, what exactly are you selling, or what is the story behind this brand? And you have to be able to recite, mine was Alexander McQueen, so I know a lot about Flowers of the Night, for example, and those kinds of silly things where you go through these training days actually build you up as from day one. And then from there, also actually just working as a team, like, pep talks in the morning, those kinds of things, and feeling part of a belonging is important for sure.
Definitely. And sort of jumping sort of further on into your journey about sort of getting pinched by Cognizant, how did that occur?
So I was working in a co-working space called Work.life off Tanner Street. And one of the great things about co-working spaces, it's a little bit different now because the pandemic and the WeWorks, etc., are probably about 30 or 40% capacity of what they usually are. They offer a lot of events, free events. And we used to have a number of students turn up as well. And I'd recommend that you look into them because you can meet some really interesting people, whether that be if you're looking for a mentor, finding work experience, or just want to learn about a particular industry or line of business. And I was at one of these events, and it was what was it called? I think it was called Women in Tech, actually. And I saw my soon-to-be boss doing a talk on sales, and I saw how charismatic she was and the kind of challenging questions that she was asking the audience. And I was actually kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, this person's really, really good at sales. That's who I want to be when I grow up, basically. So I chatted to her a bit afterwards, spoke about what we were doing. Then we just became friends. And at the point, the startup I was working at, offered a really terrible entry-level salary. I mean, it was like fine for the time being living in London, but then I basically got incentivized by more money, and then eventually got poached because she heard about the progress from other people in my team about what I'd been up to.
How did you impress others in that team?
I think the first thing is actually grit. So this is very specific to salespeople. And also, one of the things I found is a lot of people fall into it as a career. It's not for everyone. It is really grueling, and dealing with rejection day in, day out. Like when you're a sales development representative, I remember days making 400 phone calls across a 2.5-day period. I spoke to one person, they told me to F off. So like you need pretty thick skin to do it. So I never really gave up. It didn't phase me. I think the other thing was actually really enjoyed operations. It's something that I was fortunate enough to have more of a hands-on experience with. And so taking an active interest in improving other areas of the business, and then seeing like, okay, so, that's the sales department, but how can I improve feedback for marketing messaging? Or how can I, they keep talking about this particular pain point on phone calls or emails that I'm having. How can we fix that in customer success? And when you do that, and your senior managers see that you're doing that, they'll ask you to be more involved in those sorts of activities in future, and you start accruing a lot of different skills. And that's when you start progressing much, much faster than someone else who just sits there and does their 9 to 5.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. In those days when you didn't manage to speak to anyone, what was the longest period you went like that for? Was it something that occurred a lot? Or?
I would say it happened. I think the worst period was probably a 10-day dry spell, which is you don't have any meetings booked, which is basically what your KPIs are as a junior salesperson. Is number of meetings booked, and you were having kind of conversations with people, but they weren't converting. Which means they say like, oh yeah, like it's kind of interesting, but not for right now. And there's a lot of different ways to dissect that. And so particularly in the early days, it's actually a process that we're going through at the moment, and also kind of relates to a very early stage, just ideation, is okay, is it the messaging? Is it the kind of questions that we're asking? Like we're able to get on the phone with people, but they're not booking a meeting. So it's something that we're saying, the way that we're representing ourselves is not connecting with our target audience. Like, let's try all these different A/B tests and figure out what is resonating, and then try that. So yeah.
Was it just phone calls you did, or was there sort of email sequencing and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so an omni-channel presence, so phone, video, like voicemails, sending people gift cards, sending people there's this amazing story of a company called ReachDesk that I'm an investor in. And what they do is they help you engage with potential prospects by sending personalized gifts. And so one of the people that they were trying to sell to was Chelsea Football Club. And they found out that I think it was the head of operations there was actually an Arsenal fan working at Chelsea. And so the CEO of ReachDesk sent one Arsenal cufflink and a letter that said, I'll bring the other, it must be so tough being an Arsenal fan in Chelsea, I'll bring the next one to our meeting. And the guy called him back within 15 minutes of receiving the letter and booked a meeting straight away. So creativity with your outreach is paramount. I've heard of people leaving fake wallets around with business cards in it and saying, oh, I think this is the managing director's wallet, can you hand it back to him? And then get calls back. But I think that's an old wives' tale, but maybe.
What's the most creative thing you did? Do you remember? Do you
have what's the most creative thing I did? I think one I'm particularly proud of is the head of Fujitsu was doing a talk at a conference, and she was talking about how she helped people win a Guinness World Record together by using Fujitsu screens to build a massive, like an even bigger TV. So they hold the record for the world's biggest TV or something like that for all of their clients. And she was standing outside and I was kind of chatting to her and I said, wow, that's amazing. However did you like come up with that? And she jokingly said a packet of Benadryl and a bottle of gin. So I sent her a care package that was a packet of Benadryl and a bottle of gin and said it was so nice. Hopefully this will help you be more creative in future. And then she called me back.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. Moving on to more sort of the entrepreneurship side of things. Many of us in the audience today and anyone listening to the recording want to start a business or look into starting a business, but don't know really where to start and what to do. And what would your advice be?
Sure. So the very first one is being a student is one of the times in your life where you have just endless amounts of time. Like I fully regret not spending more time speaking with my peers about ideas. Like, we chat about conversations and usual university things, but we never spoke about problems or potential to solutions to them. So the first is just talk to people around you and see what problems they're facing. The first place I'd start would probably be using something called the Lean Business Canvas, which is for any business students, I'm sure they've come across it before, but it's probably one of the best ways to ideate that I found, at least. I won't go through all the steps now, but if we begin with the problem first, so is define the problem. What's that one thing that you really want to fix? I don't mean something huge like world hunger, because that's near on impossible with the resources that you have, but something that's affecting you personally are often the best problems that you can work on. So sometimes going into a career, which is what I did, unveils more problems within a businesses that I could see and want to fix. And it was just finding one that I cared about, like one I wanted to invest time in. So for me, for example, when you're doing software sales, so I've done about probably 2,500 to 3,500 product demos. That's half an hour on a WebEx chatting with someone. After that, you have to spend 20 minutes filling in forms. And it annoyed me so much that I was just like, I need to fix this problem. So I built the current product that I'm working on today. The second step would be existing alternatives. So, who else is working on that problem? And also for your end users, your customer persona, like who else has that problem? And then use the MUM test. User interviews are going to help you provide solid data to support the hypothesis that you're looking at and get those deeper insights. Let you know if you're wasting time. Have you hit a dead end? Stop, work on something different. Then the solution, so scoping out your idea and build that kind of classic 3-week scrappy MVP. A really good example of this was the company DoorDash, which is the original Deliveroo. They're a bunch of students. They were ordering some food one day and got chatting to the takeaway owner, who was complaining about how hard it is to find delivery drivers. They went home, set up a website, literally put a phone number on there and the company's menu, the takeaway restaurant's menu. Someone called in and said, I want to order XYZ. They went to the store, paid for it, went to the person's house, and then had a 10% markup. And that was the first time that it ever happened. And that took like 20 minutes setting up a website and a mobile phone number. Then this next thing is key metrics. It's no use having all these ideas and solutions if you don't track them and pick something that's going to be your what's referred to as your North Star metrics, so the main qualification of success, whether that be daily active users, like how many orders someone's making. And that's the thing that I learned, which was a huge change during the ideation process and these interviews, is you really need to define what is a successful experiment and a failed experiment. Like Netflix, for example, if you ever used a VPN and logged in from another country, they're running experiments on every country every single time. On the original days, they were doing something like 10 tests every day that lasted 2 weeks to try and validate their experiments.
Okay. And going on, you now have an idea, but how do you know customers are actually going to want this product, or how do you actually find that out that anyone actually wants this or if their product market fit?
Sure. So, I'm gonna be a broken record here, but it's all kind of leads back to these user interviews. If you're continually talking to the market and potential users, like you should know if your product's going to be a fit or not. I made the mistake of doing this when I built my first startup, as I mentioned, where I was doing it behind closed doors and maybe talking to 10 people. It's just not enough. You should be in continuous contact with them at all point. And if you're building this MVP and you're not chatting to them, like, who are you ultimately building it for? Like, are you fixing their problems? And if they're saying, well, it's kind of good, it's not really, then you're never going to make something they want to use. You need something where they're going to be continually saying to you, okay, this iteration I'd probably use. Or is that the difference between them and saying, okay, I want this next week, like I will pay you money for this service or solution?
And was that, obviously you mentioned that Hoist was something that didn't utilize that much. Is that something Comtura has learned from, and you're speaking to customers regularly and getting those interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, I mean, we're trying to talk to, I think we probably talk to about 5 to 10 different people per week, and are on what I would describe as the precipice of them converting into paid users. So with Hoist, we actually got to about 50 users, and they were giving us enough feedback that we could continue iterating and then eventually become convert to paid. So that's why you need to keep talking to them, right? Is through these user interviews. Eventually you'll get some beta users, and then those beta users, you basically keep getting their feature requests until or different ideas, keep building on top of it until they eventually said, actually, you know what, this is a fully fledged product, I would pay for this service. And it's the same as where we're at now with Comtura, is that we've got more and more users. It's a much more technical product, as it's got AI and machine learning elements in it, so it requires data to operate. But once the models are complete, there should be no reason why they shouldn't convert into paid.
Okay. And that sort of links quite well into my next question. When you first started a business, how do you actually successfully get that product to market, get it out the door? How did you do that with Comtura versus Hoist? Was it different strategy or?
Sure. So there are a number of different ways to successfully deploy a product. So again, user interviews, the first one should be your users. If they aren't, like, what have you been doing with your time? The second is strike a deal with a channel partner to resell your product for you. It's very easy to offer a revenue split, and you basically deal with delivery and maintenance of the product and the support piece, and they do with distribution and sales. You can quite often find these kind of people when you actually just, LinkedIn is a amazing networking tool and resource, and it's quite easy to find them typically. Another one is your referrals in your network. So I mentor a few younger startups, and some of them are students. Whenever I say that, they usually groan and they say, oh, I'm at university, I don't have a network. Total rubbish. You all have parents, and even if you don't have parents, you're orphan, you will have friends who have parents who will know someone or something. I'm not saying that you should only be friends with someone to get through to their network, but primarily there will be people in this lecture, or people who are watching this in future, who will know someone who will be able to help you either be like a beta tester, or know someone you should talk to about being a potential user. I'm in the B2B world, which is a little bit different. But if you're looking for a B2C product, you can pay a influencer 50 quid and they will post on Instagram, and you can quite often get users like that quite easy. Another really good one, again, for B2C products is there's Reddit, there's Facebook. There are all these different communities and forums where you can find, like, if you're selling, I don't know, like bike tires, you'll be able to find a forum that specializes in bikes and people who are very passionate about this subject. Those can be your first users and testers. You just have to do a bit of digging and ask the right kind of questions in those forums as well.
Okay. And what specific challenges are there taking a product to market, especially in the tech industry?
So the thing is, with tech, there's a lot of blockers. The first one is, it depends what kind of solution you're creating, but if you are touching a company's CRM system, which is basically its brain and where it stores all of its customer data, as you can imagine, they're really protective over it. So how you plug into it and like what you're taking in and out can really slow down conversations. I mean, for me, plugging in recently took me nearly 2 months to do one company. Same thing with compliance, like what data are you reading, especially the UK and EMEA, like GDPR is a very hot topic. And that's just about protecting data privacy. So we have to be very careful about what information is communicating between us and them. Cybersecurity, like if we get hacked, can someone use that to get into their systems? And it can be very hard to engage with a tech company because of those potential blockers. The one plus side, other businesses typically have a lot of money, so it's not really a question of price. Like primarily, some of them will be turning over hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So when you ask them to pay for, $50 a license, it's not that much of an ask. Whereas if you're in the B2C market and trying to sell like Netflix, for example, that was like huge uproar when it went from $7.99 to $9.99. That's you don't encounter that in the tech space.
And moving on to more how you finance startups and finance your own businesses, what was your experience raising your first round, and when do you think you should do it, timeline wise?
To be totally honest, it was truly terrifying. I mean, I come from a sales background, so I was used to kind of pitching questions, but it's very different when it's your thing and kind of your baby, and you're very emotionally involved with it, especially when you poured so much time and effort and money into it. After your first 10 kind of pitches, it's like anything, it gets a lot easier. The format's pretty stereotypical, like pretty typical. You have a 10-20 minute pitch. They occasionally interrupt you to ask questions, which can sometimes throw you off, but they usually wait to the end. Similar to the cold calling, funnily enough, it's ultimately a numbers game and you get a lot of rejection. But what you want to aim for, particularly with fundraising, is just getting a feedback. So asking a really good question is, what was my weakest slide and why? If they reject you, they don't often do that, but you should always be looking to improve. I think I went through maybe 100 different iterations of my pitch deck. One important thing that I want to urge you all to realize is, like, investors are not there to validate your idea. Most of the time, they have no idea what they're talking about, the problems that you're trying to solve. It is very rare that you have like a specialized investor that's an expert in the field. So don't worry about it if they say, no, I'm not interested. Like we do, our system relies on call recording, like we're being recorded right now. And I had one guy that said, oh, there's no one's ever going to want a sales conversation recorded ever, and then said no. And I literally emailed him afterwards saying that about 95% of conversations are now recorded so that we can improve training. But there you go. The other thing you mentioned was the timing and the when should you do this. It really depends, and there's no perfect answer for this. For me, it was when I wanted my two technical co-founders to leave their job and go on it full time. I was full time on it by myself for about, I mean, the whole journey took me 6 or 7 months until I found them, but another 2 months until they got full time. And I basically wanted to increase the speed of deployment so that we could maintain pace with our competitors. And I saw that the market was moving away for us and was in a position, because timing is so crucial for startups. Like if you mistime stuff, for example, like if Netflix had been 10 years earlier and it was, the internet wasn't ready to be a streaming service, or, everyone had VCRs in their homes and no one owned a computer, it would have failed straight away. So I have saw some things moving around, and I thought it would, our competitors would consume too much of the market. And a lot of our solution relies on transcription, and so the quality of transcription was at a good enough state where our product would work properly. So that's a really difficult one for me to answer, but I would recommend doing it primarily when you have at least one user who has agreed to co-develop your solution with you. And if it's a B2C product, you have at least 100 people using it, and daily active users, not monthly active users.
Okay, I've got a few follow-up questions on that.
Sure.
Firstly, really on the investment side of things, you said, investors can't validate a product or a business.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say there's a sort of catch side to that? So say you raise a very big round you weren't expecting to. Would you say that, and now you feel like your product's validated, would you also say that, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful?
Like absolutely not. Like the stats in the UK are about, I think it's 90% fail before they get to their first fundraising round, and then after that it's about 50%. So even with the money that you have, and your survival rate gets higher with each round that you do. But we've got an MVP. We've raised 350K. And if we don't get any customers between then and now, I can't pay my salaries, I can't pay my employees' salaries. There's no guarantee it's going to survive. There's the next stage, is seed round, which you typically aim to raise in the SaaS space, so software as a service. This magical kind of 10K MRR is when you should start looking to raise your next round. So that's only a turnover of 100,000 a year. When you're trying to raise, $500,000 and then scale from there. And what can happens quite a lot is you have something called a Series A graveyard. So your Series A is when you about $1 million ARR, so turning over $83,333 per month, and there is no guarantee that you have found your product market fit. You've only actually found it past that, because what investors are looking for there is, okay, this company's, it's adding a few users, but are the previous ones like renewing? And can I use the data that they've collected to accurately predict whether a user will continue being a user in 5 years, and then also increase the expansion revenue? So they're like a number of dollars spent. And there's a book called Hooked, How to Build Habit Forming Products. They talk about this concept of B2C is the same, is the viral lifetime cycle. So Facebook broke pretty much every record of the viral lifetime cycle, which is the amount of time that someone takes before they talk about your product to someone else. And Facebook were getting, I think it was like 3 every half day. So there'd be one person would say, have you used Facebook? 3 times in every 6 hours, basically. And so they could explode. If you don't reach either of those kind of critical mass points, either through paying customers, because $100,000, I have a team of 6. That's not even close to the amount I spend on salaries. And it's the same with the users that Facebook was earning from ad revenue. Again, if you don't have that viral lifetime cycle and those user acquisitions per day and people staying there, then you're going to die. So you can have a lot of false starts, even when you read about these companies getting to Series A and raising 5-10 million rounds. No guarantees whatsoever.
Okay, and sort of going back to the seed round specifically, you mentioned that sort of the SaaS space that's around 10,000 MRR. What kind of amount of money would you be expecting to raise? 500K, 600K, or what sort of level?
Sure. So there's a couple of different factors. Funnily enough, this is like literally the best time to be a founder. So if you're going to do it, I would do it in the current funding environment. There's a huge amount of liquidation in the market, and day by day, the rounds are just getting sillier and sillier and sillier. And it's the same for valuations. So the things that affect your valuation are, firstly, is team. Like how strong is the management team? The second is what's your month-on-month growth rate? Like if you had a thousand, you signed a deal and it's $1,000 a month, and then you get another $1,000 next month, you're growing by 100% that month, and then how long can you maintain that growth trajectory? And investors want to see this kind of classic Nike tick of you just same amount of resource, but your traction just goes up and up. If you can demonstrate like 30% is about the base mark for your seed round, I think in today's environment, you should easily be able to raise like £1.5 million at seed round. The valuation is kind of, that's the art of a founder, right? And those negotiations. The way that I went about it personally is I paid for a subscription of a solution called Crunchbase, which basically tracks all the startup funding environments. I looked at companies in our space, similar sort of founding teams, saw what their rounds were, and then said, okay, these guys had, got these kinds of valuations. I think we're a little bit better because of X and Y. Like we've got a better team, or our user base is larger. So I'm going to add on another 5-10% to that valuation. But if I was going to give a firm number, should be easily be able to raise about £1 million for a seed round these days in the UK.
Wow. So yeah, that's a sizable amount of money to last on. And in terms of Comtura, where do you think you stand? How far away from a seed round? What's your timeline?
Sure. So we've already been offered £1 million contributed, and that's from our lead investor of our current round. And we think that we're going to try and raise between 3.5 to 4.5 million for our seed round, which is, to be honest, isn't not very typical. I think that what we're building has a lot more scope and scale than a lot of solutions on the market, what our competitors offer. And I think the valuation could be anything from, 15 to 20 million, which is a typical Series A round. But again, like, the market is not where it was a year ago or 2 years ago. So I'm going to shoot for the moon, basically. One thing that's really important, which again, I wish I'd been told and had some really good advice about, was you don't need to fundraise, right? There's actually, in the past 6 months, so MailChimp got sold, totally bootstrap company. They grew really slowly. Well, let's say slowly in comparison to like other startups that were funded, but the founders retained 100% control, and they just sold for, I can't remember, it was like 6 billion. Then you had Basecamp, who have been going for 20 or 30 years. No, sorry, I'm lying. 10 years, and again, they're turning over like tens of millions, and they are probably valued like well over $1 billion. And again, never taken a round of funding. Whenever you take that funding, you're diluting your paycheck at the end of the day. And more recently, there are these kind of debt equity companies called like pipe.com is a really good one, or We Are Uncapped. And what these guys will do is, if you're a subscription-based solution and you have annual contracts, they're typically only billed quarterly. But what they'll do is they can buy out all of your contracts and give you, let's say, the value. So that 100K on that day, you can reinvest it into hiring your team, or paying for new solutions or whatever it is. And then you pay them back at the end of the year with a further 6%. I've effectively done like a mini round without compromising. And I've read about a number of companies that actually do this process every 6 months. So they're continually doing this payback period without sacrificing any equity. For me personally, I think I'm actually going to do this and see how far I can get up to Series B. Series B is a little bit different because these companies won't lend you anything past about, like, I think it's 2 to 5 million pounds. And a Series B is when you start, doing silly numbers like 30 to 50 million.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
Perfect. And moving on to really your side, you're self-investing in startups. You've invested in various different startups over the past couple of years. What is your investment strategy? And when you look at these startups, what sort of questions are you asking? What are you looking for?
Sure. So the first thing that I primarily look at is, so just for clarification, so I do a bit of angel investing, and I do really small, I do minimum tickets, and the minimum ticket is usually about £2.5 to £10,000. When I got a piece of advice from like a VP of EMEA for a really big software company. And he basically said, what you want to do if you ever want to start your own company is just get investor updates and see what kind of information founders are sharing with investors, and see if you can spot any kind of trends or alarm bells. And so I was lucky enough that in sales, you get paid like a reasonable sum of money. So I had some money lying around that I could invest into small startups and start getting these quarterly updates. And from that, I kind of learned that a few really important things is, one, communication is key. If someone is really bad at kind of painting a picture of what they've been doing in 3 months, and it says something like, we hired this person and we signed this logo and it was very minimal, it was typically those ones that actually did really badly because they're hiding something. And so what a really good question to ask is, like, if I was asking for an investor update now, what would you tell me what's going on? The next one is, do I have any friends or anyone in my network that has invested in them too? Do they for me personally, it's a lot about the founders. I invest at really early stage. I invested basically in pitch decks or PowerPoint slides. So I rely a lot on their previous experience, and I will quite often do some due diligence and go and speak to people who used to work with them previously and find out what kind of character references they give on that individual. And then also kind of the idea, like I really like SaaS as a space. It's very easy to judge success because you just see the monthly recurring revenue go up and up. I don't know very much about B2C solutions. I've invested in one B2C company called Personalized Co that does vitamins, and through that I've learned that it's a lot more about that viral lifetime cycle and the scaling of the number of users and how quickly that is. And then finally, the last thing that I look for is, I ask quite difficult questions during the interview. So, what was the last time that you failed, and what did you do to fix it? When was the last time that you tried to convince someone of an idea? And what was their response? Because the idea of being a founder is you have to, you're trying to, I don't want to be a cliche and say change the world, but you definitely going to try and convince someone to change their perception about a particular problem and make them feel it. So if they can't convince me about this specific problem, like, they're not going to be able to be very successful. So I've gone for high risk, high reward, Harry. It's my general strategy.
Perfect. Hopefully some high rewards then.
The last one did. So I invested in one that was a pre-seed. Their valuation was $1 million, and they just got valued at 225. I think it's 15.4x since the initial investment.
Yeah, so that's a very nice investment though.
One in a million.
yeah, exactly. And moving on now to opening up to the audience, we've got a few questions that have been direct message to me. Firstly from Yash, what are the qualities, most important elements you look for in a co-founder?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's the qualities depend on who you are as an individual. So the way that I went about this is I created a list of things that I was good at and I wasn't good at. I asked a couple of friends to do the same about me. I made the mistake of doing this after several beers, so they really didn't hold back. So maybe do it pre-drinks. For me, I knew I was kind of good at operations, sales, networking, basically just getting stuff done. Like, I don't mind getting my head down. Terrible at kind of finance, organization skills are not ideal, and I have zero technical abilities. Like, I can understand how stuff operates, and moving from one system to another, but I wouldn't be able to give you any scope as to how. You need to find someone who plugs those gaps. It seems really silly, but one of the really important ones for me is the soft skills. So often technical people are terrible at communication. And on the flip side, salespeople are really overly enthusiastic, which you think could be a good thing, but I'm telling you now from experience, if your whole team are forecasting that they're going to close 1,000 deals that month and then it turns out to be 0 because they're overly enthusiastic, it causes a lot of problems. It's not really an exact science, but I had a rule of thumb that if someone had kind of 7 of the 10 qualities that I was looking for of the gaps that I wanted filled, that was usually good enough for me to start asking, more difficult questions and pursuing that person as a potential co-founder. And then that's anything from, if you've had a screaming match for 2 hours and you're 3 years into it and you can't decide if the website should be blue or green. Funnily enough, Twitch TV actually had a really big problem with this. They spent 5 days arguing about if it's going to be the purple that is today or like this kind of forest green. Could I see myself with this person setting aside all of that high energy and aggression, and then being able to sit down and have a beer and put it away? And if the answer is no, then they're probably not someone you want to be working with 8 years down the line. One of the things that I included in that list that I've shared for you to distribute later has 50 questions to ask co-founders and help you scope out those qualities and who potentially is a good fit and who isn't. And yeah, hopefully that will help you find your match.
Thank you very much. And another question from Yash. Without your prior background in technology, how did you transition from traditional sales at Harrods to more automated sales at Cognizant?
So funnily, I always wanted to be in sales, as I mentioned earlier. And one of my other backup plans for doing biomed was to get into pharma sales and selling. I think it's called Love and Other Drugs with like Jake Gyllenhaal. I was like, wow, yeah, I want to go around hospitals selling Viagra. That sounds like great fun. But it was primarily just asking people, like, what job roles were out there, and I ended up chatting to my sister. I actually trained as a chef when I was younger and just really liked food. And then she said, "Oh, I've got this friend at uni who's doing a street food startup, which turned out to be Feast It." I handed in my CV there, and one of the things is I went really above and beyond for the interview. They asked, what would you do on, I think it was like end of day 30, and I said that I would have researched an account list. And I think I researched something like 250 real accounts for my second stage interview. So I basically got the job and started working on those 250 accounts, to selling them pretty much from day one. And no one else went that far and beyond.
Perfect. And sort of a follow up on that from Yash, what are your words to students who are interested in SaaS / tech innovation, but are not from a tech background?
Ooh, good question. So how would I go about this? You actually don't need that much experience. Like, this is something that I think a lot of people get baffled by. It's actually really easy to get into tech. There are so many entry-level positions now for large tech companies, either coming from the US to the UK. And if anyone is actually interested, I could give you a list. And they're all looking to hire these junior roles, because it's growing at such a ridiculously fast rate that actually the number of job positions way outweighs the number of candidates who are applying for them. Not to say that it's guaranteed, and obviously some experience helps, but I actually think it's a really low barrier to entry, to be perfectly honest with you, at the moment.
Perfect. And I think Thomas has a question.
Hi, sorry, I was muted. Of course it's going to happen. I had a real question. I study medicine myself, so obviously your career change is quite interesting. But what was the thing that really motivated you about the tech industry that like really drove you to swap career paths completely? Like, I know there was this push from the career of doing postgraduate medicine, but was there a real big pull to tech? And then also I have another question afterwards, like, why do you choose to do these really, really early investments in people rather than a company, it sounds like?
Sure. So why did I take that transition, or what was the pull? To be totally honest with you, so my dad was a venture capitalist, and when he was 28, he started one company and then sold it when I think he was in his mid 30s, late 30s. And so I actually already had that kind of pre-experience. And then he became a venture capitalist after he sold the company. So I'd actually had a lot of exposure to investing in startups and tech companies. He did a lot later stage though. He was primarily focused on pre-IPO companies, and also what I describe as real tech companies when they're developing like a hardware product, and that kind of thing. So I guess, yeah, like a level of nepotism. Then the sorry, could you repeat the second question again?
Yeah, sorry, it was why you choose to invest at a really early stage for a lot of the companies, and you seems like you're investing more in a person rather than a company. It's just quite interesting. You mentioned high risk, high reward, but yeah, I just wanted to know why.
Sure. So I find it's just a lot more exciting. The other thing is I've received so much help and advice from other people in the London tech scene. It's actually kind of like a club. Like once you know a couple of people and you go to events, you start seeing a lot of familiar faces. And I received so much support that when other younger founders approach me and say like, hey, can you give me advice on this? Or, how can I help do this? I feel a kind of like pay it back attitude. And almost a level of patriotism, actually. Everyone's talking about Silicon Valley and all these silly rounds and those kinds of things. And the UK government actually has some great incentives to start a company here. So that if you want to do some reading about different tax brackets, there's SEIS and EIS rounds. But that incentivizes a lot of innovation. And so I kind of would just want to make the Silicon Roundabout, as it's referred to, better than Silicon Valley is the second thing. But primarily it's just paying it back, because I had so much support for both different projects, Hoist and Comtura as it is now.
No, thank you. It's nice to hear. It's quite humbling. That's the last of the questions I had. I've got no other questions from the audience. Harry, do you have any in your inbox?
No questions directed to me from the audience so far. If anyone's got any questions, just drop it in the chat and we'll ask.
Great. The only other note I kind of had while we're waiting for any kind of final questions to come in was honestly, never ever give up. Like I had some really, really tough days. If you really want to pursue being an entrepreneur, you just have to keep picking yourself back up and surround yourself with people who are going to help you when you say an idea, rather than shooting you down and say the phrase yes and, or how about we did XYZ. Those are the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with. It really does pay off making those connections at the stage you guys are at. And it's actually one of my biggest regrets. I should have invested way more time, as I mentioned, with my peers and talking about these big ideas. And hopefully you'll find your business partner. Who knows?
Exactly. It doesn't look like we've got any other questions from the audience. If anyone wants to unmute, you're welcome to. But otherwise, I think we can finish today.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, I'll stop the recording there.